And we are back. Gentlemen, welcome all. Rick, let me start with you. The Challenger explosion, January 28th, 1986. There it is on our screen. We all remember, haunted by that morning.
1 minute, 15 seconds. Velocity 20.
Everyone lost.
Per second, altitude 9
and it was
miles,
your challenge, after that explosion, less than 3 years later, to go back up into space. And there you are, as the commander of Discovery. When you got in that spacecraft, the first one after the Challenger, how scared were you?
I was scared, but I was scared on the other two that I flew on. It was kind of paradoxical. I felt more vulnerable because I knew that humans had been killed in space on a shuttle before, but I also felt this would be the safest mission ever.
What goes on in people's minds at liftoff or re-entry?
Well, I think there's an exhilaration. You've trained for many, many months, and you're finally getting the ride of your life, but then the reality sets in, and you know that you're sitting on top of a lot of explosives. And so, in my case, my thoughts bounce back and forth from the professional look at the screens, make sure everything's going well, and recognizing how much at risk I was.
And so, if something catastrophic went wrong, you would?
Go fetal. Close your eyes.
There's nothing else to do.
In most cases, in those environments, there's nothing else to do.
Observing what you did yesterday, do you have any sense what may have happened?
No, I think that, however, that the signatures that were discussed in yesterday's press conference are lead NASA down one path that they will have to explore, and that has to do with the possibility of tile damage. But as they have very carefully said, they cannot be distracted from looking at other possibilities, and I'm sure they'll have several teams looking at very different possibilities.
Senator Nelson, just a few weeks before the Challenger explosion, you were up in the Columbia, and we'll show you on the screen. There you are aboard that craft. Tell us about going up in space, the liftoff, the reentry, and then yesterday, when you saw the very spacecraft that you went in space on exploding.
Well, it was almost 17 years to the day that we have this additional tragedy. America will come back. We'll find the problem, we'll fix it, and we'll fly again. It's important to us as a people, as explorers and adventurers. But space flight is risky business, Tim. You know, on that re-entry, we were on the night side of the Earth, and I remember looking out the window, and it's just like day because of the 3,000-degree heat has heated up, and that glow of the underside is coming around the entire craft.
Buzz Aldrin, I'll show you, second man in history to walk on the moon after Neil Armstrong, July 20th, 1969. And as I was doing my research some years ago to interview you on the 30th anniversary of the event, I found that Frank Borman, the former astronaut, had called Richard Nixon, the president, and urged him to contact his young speechwriter, William Safire, to write a speech in the event that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were left on the moon. And the words were actually written, and it is extraordinary to read, in that it was, in effect, these men have now chosen a fate as heroes to stay on the moon because of their pioneer spirit. Did you ever believe there was a possibility that you'd be stranded on the moon?
Well, I think Neil and I both enjoyed being on the moon, but I don't think we would have chosen to stay there. Frank is always concerned about all eventualities, but I'd be very surprised if any leader of a major organization would not plan in some way for contingencies and have prepared in some way to deal with what would happen if things didn't turn out.
That use of word contingency is so important, because I had an opportunity to ask Michael Collins, who had stayed back in your spaceship. I said, if in fact something went wrong, were you trained, were you prepared to leave Aldrin and Armstrong on the moon? And he said, yes, that's how I was trained.
Absolutely. He was the one who brought us back, even when we came on board the spacecraft, because he was trained to do that.
Yesterday, we heard NASA repeatedly say contingency plans are in effect. Contingency plans are in effect. When a crisis strikes NASA, immediately the professional training takes over.
In many cases, the contingency, the backup procedure needs to be put in a favorable mode of operation. So you modify the primary so that the backup or the contingency has a much more favorable chance of success.
Senator Nelson, you said at one of the congressional hearings looking into NASA, we are starving the shuttle budget, greatly increasing the chances of catastrophic loss. Explain that.
Indeed. Over the past decade, NASA's budget has not increased in real spending dollars. The safety upgrades for the space shuttle have been delayed. And there have been a number of us in NASA as well that have been hammering on the administration to continue these upgrades. Now, I don't think that the delays of those upgrades had anything to do with yesterday's tragedy. But now, sadly, because of this tragedy, we'll get those upgrades because we're going to have to fly as safe as possible.
You believe there is a future for the shuttle program, manned shuttles program?
Oh, indeed. They were talking that the space shuttle is going to go to 2020. Now, I think we've got to make the decision, are we going to replace this orbiter, or are we going to develop the new technologies for a new space plane? It'll be years down the road before it would be ready, but that would then start to integrate the fleet so that we can supply the space station and get that science in this magnificent platform that is up there, the International Space Station.
The cost of the Columbia was $1.7 billion. Is this nation, is this Congress, is this president prepared to spend more money on space?
The nation has to be led by the president. I believe that the will of the American people is that we explore space. I hope that that can be translated into a vigorous program that will take us beyond the space station, that will take us to Mars or back to the moon. The nation needs a vision, and the space program is how we can fulfill that vision.
Commander Houck, when people say, you know, we have problems here on Earth, Medicare, Social Security, prescription drugs, an impending war with Iraq, a crisis with North Korea, maybe we should just abandon our space program and stay close here to Earth.
Well, that would be turning away from a bit of our destiny, I think. It's clear that we have a lot of issues competing for our tax dollar. But we never take all of our money and devote it to solve one problem. We're always in a position of having to diversify our resources and pick priorities. And I think Senator Nelson is correct. It's a question of leadership, and it's a question of what the American will is.
Buzz Aldrin, 100 years ago, we had the first manned flight, the Kitty Hawk.
Yes.
And look where we've come in 100 years. Where do you see space travel in the next 10 years, the next 100 years?
Well, from Kitty Hawk, 66 years later, we were walking on the moon. I'm not sure the pace of evolution of the space program is going to keep up with that rapid change. I certainly see that in the next century, people will be on Mars.
In the next century?
In the next century.
Americans on Mars?
Within the next century. Now, I think we can do a lot better than that. I think we should return to the moon. I happen to feel that a very robust access to space program can be enhanced considerably by things that are going to be looked askance today, and that's public space travel, beginning to expand the opportunities for private citizens to travel in space.
What is the benefit to the average American of the United States going to the moon or going to Mars?
I think there's an inspiration, there's a destiny, and there's still a competition. The latest, I understand the Chinese will be putting up an astronaut perhaps in October, and I think that they see themselves having a destiny of the next century being the destiny and the century of the Chinese. I don't think Americans want to see us lose all that we've invested in so far, and the dedicated lives of those people who have been invested in furthering this program, I think deserves a continuation of our best efforts.
When I interviewed Armstrong, Collins, and Aldrin on the 30th anniversary, I asked Mike Collins about life somewhere else in the universe, and he said, absolutely. Do you agree with that?
I agree.
You do?
I agree that I don't know that we can make it absolutely. Intelligent life, you know, we're a unique species here on Earth. There's a lot of life here, but, you know, we're the intelligent ones.